What do innovation professionals actually do? And how do they do it? How do designers create new products, services, strategies and systems? And how do they overcome barriers to make change happen? Welcome to Idea Work, the podcast about the people, skills and mindsets behind innovation. I'm Michael Walter, and I'm glad you've joined me. Whether you're starting out in innovation, shifting careers, or just curious, you're in the right place. Let's discover what makes ideas work. Welcome back, everyone, to the second episode. I realized after the first episode that there were a few terms and frameworks that I mentioned that you might not have heard before. Partly this is because I have a very large and supportive family, and often we all are writers and do lots of different creative things, and we often share what we do before we share it to the world. And both my sister and my dad came back and said, what is the double diamond? So in this episode I'm going to explore design thinking and go into more detail about what the double diamond is. There are many other frameworks within design thinking, and there's different ways that you can use design thinking, different fields, but I'm just going to focus on the double diamond today and design thinking. So yeah, and if you have any questions about any of the shows, really feel free to go to my Substack. I'll put the link in the comments, but it's called Michael Joseph Walter at Substack. So if you search that, or you search Idea Work Michael Walter, you'll find it. And I'll be posting the episodes, and you can just post comments to the episodes or go to the discussion and ask questions, and then I can answer the questions in Substack, but also on the podcast. So design thinking is a methodology, which means it's like a collection of activities that you do, and it's a collection of activities that you do to try and solve a problem, often a complex problem, or something like create something new. So you wouldn't necessarily use design thinking if, say, I don't know, for example, the cabinet door in our kitchen broke and needs to be fixed. You're not going to need to use design thinking to do that, unless it's especially complex for some reason. You might use it, or you want to redesign how a door works, or redesign how that works. But if it's something that we already have a practice for, or a way of doing things, you wouldn't use design thinking, especially for really thorny problems, often people problems, or sustainability problems, or health-related problems. It's a framework that can be used for lots of different ways. And I'll go into more detail about the framework, but there's a few different thoughts around how design thinking happened, and like a lot of things, it probably started in a few different ways. So there's the idea that a designer attended some engineering classes and then took what they learnt about engineering and mixed it with what they understood about design, and that kind of relates. There's also this idea of IDEO, which is a design firm. They were famous for designing the Apple mouse and many other sort of famous things like that, and they took their methods of design and applied it to more service-based problems. So a hospital came and said, can you redesign our processes in the hospital? And so it helps people work together in teams to solve complex problems. Now, it's also a framework, it's a philosophy, it's a mindset, it's a way of thinking and doing things. There's lots of discussions. When you go down the rabbit hole of design thinking, there's huge amounts of discussions and lots of arguments, healthy arguments around what it is and what it means and how do you do it well. There's also lots of criticism around it and critique of it as a methodology. Natasha Jen wrote a very good article and a great talk about, and it's called Design Thinking is BS. And it's about a critique around this idea of design thinking as it kind of codifies and corporatizes something that's a creative and messy process. Design is somewhere between art and science, and typically each designer has their own process. There are certain principles they follow, like a North Star, and like principles around connecting with person, empathizing with the individual, and the people you're trying to design for, and iterating and prototyping and testing and coming to a solution. And it's quite a fluid process. And then the critique is that design thinking tries to segment this and make it quite neat and clean. I guess it all depends on how you use it and your energy and understanding of it. So it's really healthy when you, I don't know if healthy is the right word, but the further you get into this sort of field, it's really good to have an understanding of the benefits and the negatives, and like the benefits and challenges of it and the critiques of it, and to just continue learning. Okay, so what is the double diamond? So the double diamond was developed by the British Design Council in 2005. I think it's super cool that in Britain, the UK, they actually have a government department focused on design. And so it was an attempt to explain the process designers go through when they try and design a service or product or system. Okay, so there are a number of different frameworks, so we're just going to focus on the double diamond today, and in another episode we can look at the other frameworks. Broadly, it's 4 stages, and I just want to emphasize that these aren't linear stages. You do go through them in a linear process at first, but there's a freedom to go back to any of the stages or skip ahead if you need. But typically you move through these stages, and I'll talk about the flexibility of it soon. So broadly, the 4 stages are discover, define, develop, and deliver. So, and why is it a double diamond? So when you look at it visually, it's 2 diamonds next to each other. So the first one, discover and define, is 1 diamond, with discover representing the divergent first half of the diamond, and define is representing the convergent second half. Then develop and deliver is the second diamond, with develop being divergent and deliver being convergent. And why do we have those diamonds? Because, so the first stage, discover, which is all about expanding your thinking, trying to find out information and understanding of the problem. So really talking to people who are affected by the problem, doing research and, reading articles about, like, good quality articles about the problems. That's called secondary research. You might be doing observation. There's a whole range of different methods you can do to understand and do research. And that could be another episode to go into that. Once you've done so much research, or you've gone through the allocated time you have for research, and you feel like you have a solid understanding of the problem space, and you've tried to get rid of a bunch of your assumptions, and you sort of get to a point of what's called saturation, where you keep on hearing the same things again, you go through a process of trying to define and redefine the problem space. So you might start with a problem like university students aren't accessing their health, like the dentist, and that might be the broad problem space. But after actually talking to university students and meeting them, you realize that it's actually not about the fact that they can't, it's about that they don't actually understand what's available to them as international students, like what options the university has provided to them, or that there's a health clinic on the campus. And so the problem is, how might you go through a process of analysing your data. This is in the define stage. So you're taking all that information at the peak of information, and you cut it, you get critical and cut down to what is actually the problem. So that's why it's coming into a more distinct point. And so with that problem, you might think, okay, so it's not necessarily, it's actually about how might we better communicate the health services available to international students at a university. So there's a number of different methods you can use to try and get a deeper understanding. One common one is called affinity mapping, where you put all the data on post-it notes and you group the individual insights you've had, the individual bits of data you have, into what's called insights or themes. and from that you can get a better understanding of the problem space. And you're trying to find things that surprise you or you didn't realize at first. Another one is creating a persona, where you're synthesizing all the data and you're creating a few different personas that represent who you're designing for. So they're kind of fictional, but they are based on data. And the final point often in that process of synthesizing is called a how might we question, where you take the problem that you initially had and rephrase it in a curious question called the how might we question. And the reason we call it a how might we question is it's much more exciting and energizing to try to respond to a question than it is to a problem. And so that's a common process. So we've taken the initial problem and we've rephrased it as how might we better communicate to international students the health services available to them at our university. The next stage, develop, is all about coming up with ideas. This is also called ideation. So it's a real brainstorming phase where you're coming to being creative. You're thinking of as many ideas as you possibly can. You're working as a group to creatively consider. One thing that is interesting is the contrast between brainstorming and a concept called brain writing. And this is a really key part of design thinking, is this idea of when you're creatively working together, you don't have to be always talking constantly with each other. You can be using visual tools, so you could be drawing ideas. Visualization is a key part of design thinking. But with brain writing, this is where you might spend 3 minutes where you all individually, silently just write as many different ideas you can on post-it notes. You go for quantity over quality. So as many different ideas, trying not to vet the ideas or critique the ideas. You just write down as many different ideas as you possibly can. And you might say 3 minutes, you're just going to write down as many as you can. And then at the end of the 3 minutes, the alarm will go off and we'll start to share our ideas. Then you might do that for a few minutes and then you'll do it again. You'll go through another round, 2 minutes silently, based on what you heard from each other. You might jam and use some of their ideas and build on them. This whole idea of yes and in improv, you're going to say yes and this could also be included. And together you'll come up with heaps of ideas. That's why it's also divergent. You're broadening your thinking. Once you've got as many possible ideas as you possibly can, and there's heaps of different methods of ideation, and I'll send you another link called Design Kit, which has lots of different ways of doing ideation. You go through to the deliver stage. So this is where you look at all the ideas and you think, okay, what's a possible idea that we could use, and how are we going to iterate and test this idea? So you vote which one you think, or you go through a process of evaluation, which is the most viable, meaning financially it makes sense. If you're a corporation, it might be which one's going to make the most money, or which one can we fund? Do we have funds for? What makes sense? Feasibility is what technology or skills do we need, and do we have them? Is it actually possible to do this idea? Does it make sense? And finally, desirability. Which one do we think people will use or want to use and really drawn to? Because there's no point creating a perfectly fundable idea that's also possible if our user or the people that we're designing for won't even want it. What's the point? And that's a common mistake. So you want to also consider desirability. And often we consider desirability first. So we go through a process of prototyping. You choose one of the ideas. You create a rough prototype, something that represents the idea, but in really cheaply and simple ways, and really rough, so that people feel that they can give feedback to it. And then you get feedback, you do testing, and then you make changes, you do iterations. And you do this again and again and again and again and again until you get a working prototype, something that it can actually be applied. And so it might be that the idea was, well, often people who come here from overseas are isolated. Why don't we make events, and we could partner with Bupa and other healthcare providers and members from the health clinic, the different practitioners, and they can meet them in a social, safe environment, and they're actually also meeting each other. And so in this way, it's hitting a few goals. And you test that and you decide, okay, we're going to do this really simply. We're just going to organize one basic event on campus. We're going to make it bring your own food and drink so that it's not going to cost anything. And we're just going to invite the health clinic staff to be there. We might just put some Tim Tams on the table and some tea. But really, it's just a chance to socialise and connect. And so that might be the idea. And once you do it once, it does really well, and you take the data of how many people came, and you survey the participants after they didn't, find out what the benefits were. You take that data and take it to the university and say, look, this has worked really well. What do you think? And they say, great, yeah, here's some funding, and you can do this 6 times a year, every year. And you're like, woohoo, cool, let's do this. And you continue to do that. So that's a really rough explanation of the double diamond. Now, as I said at the start, it's not linear. So if at any point you get to a stage in that double diamond and say you get to define and you're trying to work out the how might question and you're stuck, you just can't do it, that might be that you don't have enough data, you haven't done enough research. So you have to go back, return to the discover phase and do more research. It might also be that you come to ideation and the problem is too specific or it's too broad and you just really can't come up with any ideas. It might mean that you actually need to redefine the problem space again. Come up with a better how might we question. And so you can see that it's this iterative process. It's moving back and forth. You're not just going directly from the start to finish. At any point you can go to a different stage. So yeah, I think that's enough. I think we could go into greater detail about all that, but I think first it's good to just get a basic understanding of the process. I'll put a visual up on my Substack. You can look at that. I recommend trialing it. Maybe just trial one of the stages. You might be in a Teams meeting and everyone's like, let's come up with great ideas and let's all have a brainstorm meeting. Let's all just talk. Let's all talk and come up with ideas. Yeah, brainstorm. And you'll be like, hey, why don't we try this thing where we do brainwriting? I got some post-it notes. Let's just write down and draw some ideas. And just do that and see how it goes. Practice maybe first so you don't get put down, and hopefully you got a psychologically safe workplace. But just try and pepper some of these methods into your everyday work, and slowly, you might be able to practice the whole process with various methods along the way. And I just think that being an undercover designer is a great way to get started. All right, good luck, and I hope this has been helpful. Let me know your feedback, and yeah, all the best with your entry into design and innovation. Thank you for listening to today's show. Make sure you subscribe to keep track of all the episodes, and I look forward to having you here again. Have a great day.